Everyone, we hope you all have a good time and you will enjoy this analysis of the poem Harlem. Harlem is written by Langston Hughes in 1951. The poem is written in a time where there was a lot of racism and segregation against African Americans in America. The author is wondering what would happen if a dream about freedom differs. The poem is filled up with similes to describe what a dream deferred could end up like. Already in the second sentence, the author asks, does it dry up like a raisin in the sun? He compares a dream deferred with a raisin dried up in the sun. When something is drying up, then it's not worth much compared to when something is juicy. Maybe the dream is fading out and never became a reality. Of the sores and other things becomes fester when they don't healing and aren't be taken care of. So the other indicate a deferred dream won't heal the African Americans and their dreams. Rotten meat is a metaphor for dead people. Maybe some people are going to die because of the dream. Mostly every people think in sugar as a good and positive thing. We like when someone or something is sweet. Maybe there be a crust and a protecting shell over the dream, and it all be good for a while. He compares the dream with a heavy load. Maybe it's a dream too great to be completed, and maybe instead it will all fall apart and get any worse. Harlem is a very dark-toned poem. It describes a lot of bad things that could happen to the dream about freedom for the black people. Crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet is a contrast to the other sentence and similes in the poem. It is the only bright spot in the poem. Maybe there was a hope that it all will be good at some day. Maybe someday there could be equal rights between the colored and the white people. It is kind of a stressed poem. The construction makes the poem very confusing. The author is wondering, and it makes the reader to think a lot and wonder too.
The meaning of the poem is to get the African Americans' attention and give them the idea of that they are as good as the whites, and they have to believe in that. They need to break out of the social inheritance about the thought of that African Americans always was the second-class citizens in the society. The theme in the poem by Langston Hughes could be the powerlessness of the African Americans in society. The reason for that is that the poem deals with the African American's dream about to achieve the same rights and be equal to the whites in the society. The 1860s were the period of the American Civil War. The Civil War namely treated rights and slavery, which connects to the possible theme powerlessness. In 1865 the slavery in America was eliminated, but the African Americans were far from equal to the whites, especially in the South States. The next 100 years until the Civil Rights Movement in the late 1950s and in the 60s, the southern part was controlled by the Jim Crow laws, which demand racial segregation in all public facilities. We think that Langston Hughes' deeper message through his poem is that the dream of equality between African Americans and the whites will differ, and if everyone denies it, it will all explode and hit the entire country, not only the African Americans community. However, his message isn't based on an exact event, but is instead based on the whole time period for racial segregation in America and the limitations of the American dream for African Americans. All in all, Langston tried to capture the African Americans' attention through his poem. He also tried to set down his own thoughts about the consequences, about what could happen to the African Americans and the country if anybody doesn't do something. However, Langston hopes to have depicted the inequality between blacks and whites, and he hoped it will start a revolution against segregation.